From inedible gourds, ignored by animals, to sacred food that sustained civilizations, to orange symbols of harvest and family, to a spice mix on a store shelf, and finally, to a culture obsession with no pumpkin whatsoever. Pumpkins weren't always about pie and decorations. Long before lattes, they were survival food that people relied on to make it through hard seasons. So how did they go from life or death to pumpkin spice craze? In this video, we're uncovering the untold story of pumpkins, from their sacred role in ancient cultures to why early settlers weren't always fans, to how they became a symbol of fall traditions, and yes, how all of that eventually led to the pumpkin spice latte, or beer, in your hand. It's a 10,000-year-old journey that stretches from survival to Starbucks, and it all begins with the wild pumpkin. Before we get started, tap like, share this video with a friend who loves fall, and subscribe for more hidden food history stories. If this video hits 500 likes, I'll know that you want more videos just like this one. Wild pumpkins didn't look anything like the big orange ones that we see today. They were small, bitter, and tough. Not something that you'd want to carve for Halloween. And definitely not something you'd want to sip on. Most animals even ignored them, but early farmers in Central America saw potential. The story actually begins much earlier, in small villages, towns like this place here. This is in southern Mexico. Archaeologists working there found pumpkin seeds in rinds going back as far as 8,000 to 10,000 years ago. And here's the key: those seeds are noticeably larger than their wild relatives. That tells us that people were already selecting pumpkins, saving seeds for plants with more flesh, bigger seeds, and thinner rinds. In other words, they weren't leaving it to chance. They were shaping pumpkins into real food crops. Slowly, pumpkins transformed into something that people could count on. This changed everything. For hunter-gatherers, survival meant moving constantly, chasing game and wild plants. But pumpkins were different. They could be stored for months, grown alongside corn and beans, and harvested in large amounts. Together, these crops formed the backbone of agriculture in the Americas, the famous Three Sisters. We'll learn all about the Three Sisters in this video that I made here. That stability gave people the chance to settle down, to build villages, and eventually great civilizations. Think about the Incas, who ruled an empire of nearly 12 million people. None of that was possible without the reliable crops like pumpkins, corn, and beans. Farming meant food security, and food security meant the freedom to build temples, cities, and culture. But not everybody respected pumpkins. When the Spanish arrived, some saw them as poor man's food, plain, rustic, and too common to be refined. They couldn't see what indigenous cultures already knew. Pumpkins weren't just food. They were survival, tradition, and resilience. That deep history, from bitter wild gourd to sacred crop, is what eventually shaped the pumpkin into more than just something that we eat. It became a symbol of abundance. And that symbol is what carried pumpkins forward into the holidays, into traditions, and eventually pumpkin spice. The story doesn't stop there. When pumpkins crossed the ocean and met European settlers, their journey took a surprising turn. Some embraced them while others mocked them. It's a lot like today. You either love or hate pumpkin spice, and that clash of views shaped how pumpkins became part of our traditions. We'll get to that in a moment. First, a quick word about something I think that you'll love. A childhood friend of mine is an artist who makes hand-blown glass pumpkins and gourds, and they are stunning. Each one is unique, with colors and swirls that you won't find anywhere else. They've become incredibly popular because they capture autumn in a way that lasts year after year. If you want to bring that fall feel into your home or gift it to someone special without waiting for pumpkins to ripen, check out his work on Amazon. I've linked it below. These go fast every season, so if you see one you like, grab it before it's gone. When European settlers first came to the Americas, pumpkins were everywhere. Indigenous farmers had been growing them for thousands of years, and they shared these crops with the newcomers. At first, pumpkins were a lifesaver. They were hardy, easy to grow, and filling. Explorers and traders naturally brought seeds back to Europe, but not everybody loved them. Back in Europe, pumpkins didn't have the same reputation they held in the Americas. They were often dismissed as rustic or poor man's food, as I mentioned, too plain for the wealthy and refined. Still, some cooks experimented, and in 1670, English author Hannah Woolley published a recipe for pumpkin pie, layering pumpkin with apples, raisins, and spices. It shows that even then, people were beginning to see pumpkins as more than survival food. Later, in colonial New England, pumpkins became essential. They were baked, boiled, mashed into breads and stews, and even puddings. One of the very first pumpkin pies looked nothing like today's version. It was a hollowed out pumpkin filled with milk, honey, and spices, roasted right in the fire. Their importance was captured in a colonial rhyme. We have pumpkins at morning and pumpkins at noon. If it were not for pumpkins, we should be undone. Kind of dramatic if you ask me. But while the Europeans didn't immediately crown the pumpkin as king, in America, it began to take root. Slowly, pumpkins shifted from survival food into tradition. And in the centuries ahead, they wouldn't just feed people, they'd help shape the holidays we celebrate to this day. By the 1700s, pumpkins weren't just food anymore. They were becoming icons. Pumpkins had moved far beyond survival food. Farmers and gardeners weren't just relying on them for calories anymore. They were shaping what pumpkins looked like and what they tasted like. At first, the focus was on flavor and texture. Wild pumpkins were small, bitter, and tough, packed with chemicals that made them unpleasant to eat. Animals even avoided them, but humans began saving seeds from pumpkins that were less bitter, with softer flesh and fewer hard seeds. Over time, chance and human selection turned them into one of the first genetically modified foods. Pumpkins that stored better and were worth cooking. Once pumpkins became reliably edible, a second transformation began. Farmers and customers started paying attention to color and shape. Bright orange pumpkins with smooth rinds stood out in the field and looked more appealing on the table. They were easier to recognize as ripe, easier to sell in markets, and they came to symbolize abundance. By the 18th and 19th centuries, pumpkins weren't just food. They were cultural icons. On the farm, their bright orange glow signaled harvest time. On the table, they were baked into pies, sweetened with molasses or maple syrup, honey, becoming a Thanksgiving staple. And in communities, they took their place in autumn rituals and festivals. That journey from bitter wild gourd in Mexico to large, sweet orange pumpkins in American fields shows how people didn't just grow pumpkins, they created them. First taste, then size, then color, each trait layered on as every generation saved the seeds they liked best. By the time pumpkins were tied into Thanksgiving and Halloween traditions, they had become more than food. They were the symbol of the season. And that iconic look, big, round, glowing orange, set the stage for pumpkins to leap from tradition into pop culture, and eventually into pumpkin spice. Modern pumpkins have always been tied to pies and fall traditions, but in the last 20 years, they transformed into something bigger. A global pop culture phenomenon. Families mix their own spices, cinnamon, nutmeg, ginger, and cloves, to flavor their pumpkin pies at Thanksgiving. Then, in 1934, the spice company McCormick made it easy. They released a pre-mixed blend called pumpkin pie spice. For the first time, those flavors of fall came in a single tin. It didn't just save time in the kitchen, it branded a taste. And by the mid-20th century, pumpkin pie spice was a fixture in pantries across America. But the real cultural explosion came decades later in 2003. Starbucks launched the pumpkin spice latte. And here's the twist. There's usually no pumpkin in pumpkin spice. The flavor we know comes from the very same spices McCormick had packaged 70 years earlier. Starbucks wasn't inventing something new. They were taking a flavor tied to family tradition and repackaging it as a drink, then marketing it as a taste of fall itself. The result? A phenomenon. The pumpkin spice latte became a billion-dollar success and sparked pumpkin spice everything, from candles and cereals to dog treats and beer. It wasn't just food anymore. It was nostalgia, marketing, and identity wrapped all in one. Think about that journey from inedible gourds ignored by animals to sacred food that sustained civilizations, to orange symbols of harvest and family, to a spice mix on a store shelf, and finally, to a culture obsession with no pumpkin whatsoever. Pumpkin in name only. Every fall, when people line up for pumpkin spice, they're tapping into a story that stretches back 10,000 years. So maybe that latte in your hand isn't just a trend, it's human history in a cup. Looking back, the story of pumpkins is more than just food history. It's a story about how people shape plants, and how plants, in turn, shape culture. Pumpkins have carried us through survival, tradition, and now pop culture. Next time you see a jack-o'-lantern glowing on a porch, or sip a pumpkin spice something, you're part of a story that stretches back nearly 10,000 years. Before we wrap up, I want to shout out my friend who makes these incredible hand-blown glass pumpkins and gourds. Each one is unique, and they capture that fall magic in a way that lasts year after year. I've linked them below in the description, so if you see one you like, grab it before it's gone. If you enjoyed this journey, hit subscribe and join me for the next chapter. I'll see you on the next one.